So moving on to our second key mindset, which is spare and spur your ingenuity. So once again, we're going to look at the iceberg. And what I love about this is, remember how I said kind of looking at things different ways, framing them can have different effects. This is somebody who's using the iceberg analogy again, but they're using it a very different way. Whereas the iceberg model I first showed you focused on the bottom of the iceberg, this one focuses on the top of the iceberg. And this analogy is from a brilliant woman by the name of Sheena Iyengar. And she says, this picture of the iceberg right now kind of represents your consciousness, whereas the majority of your thinking is subconscious, i.e. below water, and just a fraction of your thinking is actually conscious, where you're fully aware of it. In fact, she says, although icebergs typically are 10% is above water and 90% is below water, our consciousness is even worse. It's only 5% that's above water. The rest is unconscious, 95%. In fact, the expression pay attention is actually very apt because we have a limited attention span. You have a finite budget of attention and you have to be careful with it. That's why we encourage you to ask, how do you want to spend your 5% of conscious effort? So again, you can't be alive to all these kind of uncertainties because your brain is going to be overwhelmed. Once you're aware of the fact that you have mental models and they leave things out, you have to use it judiciously. You have to pick those 5% of key things that you really want to kind of focus on. And we're going to talk about this next week in our session that talks about zoom in, zoom out, and experimenting in more detail. But what we're going to try and do is give you a tool that can actually spare your ingenuity, which will try to help you at a high level figure out what to focus on and what not to focus on. So number one is, what's the problem? What we're noticing a lot of times is there's a rush to solutions and people forget the problem that inspired it. So every time you hear a new idea to make something better, I always have the discipline to say, well, hold on, what's the problem? And that can actually be a really important question. In fact, the identification of what the problem is could be like the most important part, believe it or not, of your journey towards a solution. And not only identify the problem, ask yourself, are you asking the right question to identify the right problem? Which again, can be surprisingly hard. And you can ask yourself, is there a way that you could maybe ask a different question that would identify the problem in a different way? That can again be like surprisingly powerful. The third thing is saying, okay, we feel confident that we've got a good view of what the right problem is. What's the possible solution to the right problem? Then next, again, always important to tie back both the problem and the solution into your why. Is it achieving your why? Then asking yourselves, are mistakes likely about this? If mistakes are not likely, don't sweat it. This should not be where you devote your 5%. Are the stakes high? And again, if the stakes aren't high, don't devote your precious 5% of consciousness. And again, this is very high level and rudimentary. It's just to start you thinking about, you only have like 5% of your consciousness to really focus on. You have to be really diligent on making sure you're focusing on the right problem. And we call it the cognitive bias booster shot. Is you're going to have to think about what gets you in a zone of creativity where you're like really alive to possibilities and alive to explore things. So that might be, for some people, it's music. For some people, it's going for a walk. I actually get really jazzed when I hear about other innovation stories where people figured out problems. You got to figure out what gets you in a zone and use it sparingly. Like figure out an issue to zone in on, and then figure out what gets you really the most alive to possibilities and explorations, and then do that to get you into that zone. And it's different things for different people. So you're going to have to kind of figure out what that is. So this is the next one. This is like the really big one. This is getting different viewpoints. And again, this is all about, believe it or not, changing how you see the world in and of itself will change the world. And Jeff Mulligan, who is actually a leading thinker in social innovation from the UK, made this great observation of, if you look at it, how humanity saw things differently often leads to the greatest kind of progress that humanity sees. So for example, when microscopes were developed, we got to see the world in a different way. That led to germs, and then just imagine all the human advance that led to the discovering of germs. And again, it's seeing the world a different way. Another one is actually X-rays. Some X-rays led us to the awareness of DNA strands. So again, think of all the ways that just seeing the world in a different way has led to these huge advances. Another classic example is this one. So this is a picture from the Apollo moon mission. And it's actually the first time humanity saw the Earth as like this blue marble in space. And it was seeing the world in a different way. And depending on who you talk to, this picture of seeing the world as this blue marble either spurred the environmental movement or regenerated it. So again, changing how we see the world, powerful. So I want to dig into that a little bit more because it is so powerful. And I don't know why I picked mountain. It sounds way more Zen than I was meaning it to be. Certainly the mountain and mountain climbing features prominently in our analogies, and you'll see that next week. But just think of a mountain and you want to know the mountain in a different way. Well, you could get binoculars. So you change like what you see. Another way of getting to know the mountain could be, rather than being at the bottom of the mountain, you stand on top of the mountain and look at the mountain and think of the different view and the different understanding you would have because of that. So that could actually be changing what you see. And I'm not really crazy right now about the distinction between how you see, what you see, because they can kind of overlap, but you get what I'm saying. There's a difference between the lens that you see something versus moving your position so you get like a different view. And the third different viewpoint you can get is you can actually just talk to someone who's actually been on the mountain. So you get their viewpoint.